At my parents' anniversary dinner, my brother smirked. "You're signing the loan, it's the least you can do for family." I put the papers down and said, "Tell him to check his inbox." He suddenly went pale. I knew something was wrong the moment my brother put a folder beside my dinner plate. It was my parents' anniversary dinner, and until that point I honestly thought the folder contained old photographs or something my mother wanted us to look through after dessert. My parents were celebrating 35 years of marriage, and my mom had spent most of the afternoon texting everyone reminders about being on time. My dad had made a big deal about not wanting gifts. He said having all of us at the same table was enough. My brother Mark had arrived 20 minutes late anyway. That part was normal. Mark was almost always late. What was not normal was the folder. He placed it next to my plate like it belonged there. I looked at it, then at him. He acted like nothing unusual had happened. He was already reaching for the bread basket while my mother was telling my dad about something one of her coworkers had done that week. I remember thinking that maybe I was overreacting. That was something I did a lot around my family. I would notice something strange, convince myself I was being too suspicious, and then find out later that I had been right to feel uncomfortable. At the time, though, I had no idea what was coming. I opened the folder. The first page was a loan application. My name was already printed on it, so was Mark's. The loan amount was $186,000. I read the number 3 times because I thought I had misunderstood it. I looked at the next page. It was a personal guarantee, then another page, then another. There were documents for a small business loan, a collateral agreement, and something that appeared to give the lender rights over certain assets if the loan went into default. I felt my stomach tighten. I looked across the table at Mark. He was eating like we were discussing the weather. My parents were still talking. My sister, Emily, was scrolling through pictures on her phone. Nobody seemed to notice that I had stopped eating. I turned another page. There was a signature line for me. I had not signed anything. I had not agreed to anything. I had not even known there was a loan. I asked Mark what the paperwork was supposed to be for. He gave me the kind of look people give you when they think you are deliberately making something complicated. He explained that it was for the new location of his contracting business. I already knew Mark had been talking about expanding. What I did not know was that he had apparently decided I was going to help finance it. He explained that the bank wanted another guarantor because the business was still relatively young. My first reaction was embarrassment, not anger. Embarrassment. I remember looking around the table and realizing that everyone else seemed to know what was happening. My mother suddenly became very interested in cutting her steak. My dad stared down at his plate. Emily looked up from her phone and then immediately looked back down. That was when I realized this had been discussed before I arrived. Mark leaned back in his chair and made it clear that he considered the whole thing routine. He reminded me that I had good credit, a stable job, and a house with a manageable mortgage. He also reminded me that he was my brother. Then he said the line that stuck with me. He told me that signing the loan was the least I could do for family. He actually smiled when he said it, not a friendly smile, more like he had already won an argument we had never agreed to have. I pushed the folder away from me. I told him I was not signing anything that night. He acted surprised. Then he became irritated. He explained that the bank needed the paperwork soon. I asked why I had not been told beforehand. He said he had tried to bring it up several times. That was not true, at least not in the way he meant it. He had mentioned his business needing financing. He had never once told me he intended to make me personally responsible for nearly $200,000. Those were very different things. I remember my father finally looking up. He said that Mark had been under a lot of pressure and that everyone needed to help where they could. My mother said the loan was not really a big deal because Mark had already been making good money. I asked who would be making the payments. Mark said the business would. I asked what happened if the business could not. He shrugged. He said that was what the guarantee was for. I looked at him. Then I looked at the signature line with my name on it. That was when something inside me finally shifted. Until then, I had been thinking this was a ridiculous family argument. Suddenly, I understood that Mark was asking me to take on an actual financial obligation. If his company failed, the bank would not care that we were brothers. If the business could not make payments, my name would still be on the paperwork. If the lender pursued the guarantee, I could potentially be responsible for a debt I had never benefited from. That was not helping my brother buy groceries. That was putting my financial future behind his business. I told him I was not signing. He became quiet. Then he smiled again. He told me I should think carefully about what refusing would say about me. I remember feeling angry, but I did not want to ruin my parents' anniversary dinner, so I put the papers down. I told him I would not discuss it there. Then I said the sentence that changed the entire night. I told him to check his inbox. He stopped smiling. He asked what I meant. I did not explain. I had spent the previous 2 weeks doing something nobody at that table knew about. I had been talking to a lawyer, not because I had planned some dramatic confrontation, because I had finally realized something was seriously wrong with the way Mark handled money, and the email in his inbox contained the first piece of evidence. About 3 weeks before that dinner, I had received an email from my mortgage company. It was not unusual. I got plenty of automated messages. Usually I deleted them after checking the subject. This one was different. It said there had been a request related to my property records. At first, I assumed it was some routine refinancing solicitation. Then I noticed the wording. There had been an inquiry involving a lender and documentation associated with my home. I called the mortgage company. The representative could not give me much information because of privacy rules. She did, however, tell me that I should contact the county records office if I was concerned about an attempted filing. That was the first time I felt genuinely uneasy. I checked the county property records online. There was nothing recorded against my house, at least nothing new. I called the office anyway. The person I spoke with explained that there had been a document submitted for review, but that it had not been accepted because there was an issue with the supporting paperwork. She could not tell me much more over the phone. I asked what kind of document it was. She described it as something related to a security interest. I remember sitting at my kitchen table staring at my laptop. I had never given anyone permission to use my house as collateral. Then I remembered a conversation from a few months earlier. Mark had asked me for a copy of my property tax statement. He had said his accountant needed it because he was trying to compare property costs for a potential business purchase. I had sent him the document without thinking much about it. That suddenly felt stupid. I called him. He told me I was worrying about nothing. He said he had not done anything with my house. I asked him why a lender would have paperwork connected to my property. He said he had no idea. I wanted to believe him. He was my brother. I had known him my entire life. We had fought over stupid things as kids, borrowed each other's cars as adults, helped our parents move furniture, and shown up for each other at birthdays and funerals. I did not want to believe he was trying to put my house at risk. So I convinced myself there had to be another explanation. A week later, I received another notice. This time it was from a company I did not recognize. It was connected to commercial lending. The letter referenced a financing application involving a business owned by my brother. I called the company. They would not discuss the application with me because I was not listed as the primary applicant. But they confirmed that my name appeared in documents associated with the application. That was enough for me. I stopped calling Mark. Instead, I made an appointment with an attorney who handled property and financial matters. I brought every document I had. I explained what had happened. The attorney told me not to accuse anyone of fraud without evidence. That advice ended up being important. He said family disputes could become very expensive when people started making accusations they could not prove. He suggested that I focus on facts. Who had submitted what? When it had been submitted, what signatures appeared, what documents had been provided, what permissions I had actually given. He also told me to preserve everything: emails, text messages, bank statements, property records, copies of anything Mark had asked me to provide. I went home that night and started making a folder. I named it something boring: property documents. I did not want to give it some dramatic name. I also created a second folder for communications. That was when I started going through old text messages. I found more than I expected. Mark had asked me months earlier whether I would ever consider refinancing my house. At the time, I had thought he was making conversation. Then he had asked how much equity I had. Then he had asked whether my mortgage was fixed. Then he had asked whether I had any other debt. Individually, none of those questions seemed strange. Together, they looked different. I also found messages where he asked whether I could send him a copy of my mortgage statement. I had refused that one because I was busy. He had responded casually. I had forgotten about it. Now I was staring at the messages and wondering how many things I had dismissed because I did not want to believe something was wrong. That feeling stayed with me for days. I went to work. I bought groceries. I paid my electric bill. I went to the gym. I answered emails. Everything looked normal, but in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about my house. My biggest financial asset was suddenly part of a situation I did not understand. The strange thing was that Mark never acted nervous. He called me normally. He sent memes in our family group chat. He complained about the cost of gas. He asked whether I was coming to Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner. He behaved exactly like nothing had happened. That almost made me question myself. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe there was some legitimate business paperwork that involved my name without creating any actual liability. That was why I did not confront him immediately. I waited for more information. Then I received an email from a lender. It was addressed to me because my information had apparently been included in an application. The email contained a document that I was not supposed to have received under normal circumstances. I do not know whether it was sent by mistake or whether someone in the lender's office was simply following procedure. Either way, it changed everything. The application showed that Mark had represented me as someone who was willing to guarantee the loan. It did not contain my signature, but it listed my income. It listed the estimated value of my home. It listed my mortgage balance. Some of the numbers were correct. Some were outdated. That detail mattered. The information could only have come from documents Mark had access to. I sent the document to my attorney. He told me not to contact the lender again until we understood the situation. He also told me to check my credit reports. I did. There was a recent business-related inquiry. There were no new accounts. That was a relief, but it also made me more suspicious. If the loan had not been approved yet, why was Mark acting like I was already committed? Then I remembered something else. 2 months earlier, Mark had asked me to sign what he called a simple business authorization. He said it was for an insurance policy. I had refused because I did not understand it. He had gotten annoyed. At the time, I thought he was just frustrated with paperwork. Now I wondered if that had been another attempt. I began to understand why my attorney kept telling me to stop relying on memory. Memory changes when you are scared. Documents do not. So I started documenting everything. I saved screenshots. I printed emails. I downloaded bank statements. I requested copies of property records. I changed passwords. I froze my credit. I notified my bank that I did not authorize any new lending relationship involving my personal information. None of this felt dramatic while I was doing it. It felt like paperwork. That was probably why I stayed calm. I was not trying to catch my brother. I was trying to protect myself. Then my mother called. She wanted to know why I had been distant. I told her I was busy. She said Mark had told her I was upset about the business loan. I asked what exactly he had told her. She became defensive. She said Mark needed help and that I had always been the more financially responsible one. I asked whether she knew he had used information about my house. She said she did not know what I meant. That answer bothered me, not because I expected her to understand the legal details, because she sounded genuinely confused. I asked whether Mark had shown her the paperwork. She paused. Then she said he had mentioned that I was going to help him. I asked whether she had seen my signature. She said she assumed I had agreed. That was the first time I realized Mark might have been telling different versions of the story to different people. To my parents, I was apparently helping him. To the lender, I was apparently prepared to guarantee the loan. To me, he was acting like I was being difficult about something minor. I told my mother I was not angry with her. I also told her I was not signing anything. She said she hoped I would reconsider because it would mean a lot to the family. That sentence stayed with me, not because it was cruel, because it was so normal. This was how my family had always handled Mark. Whenever Mark wanted something, the discussion became about family. When he needed money, it was family. When he needed someone to cover a bill, it was family. When he was late, everyone waited because he was family. When he forgot something, someone else fixed it because he was family. I had accepted that for years. I just had not realized how far it had gone. At the anniversary dinner, I finally saw the result. Mark expected me to sign because everyone had already emotionally agreed that I would. The paperwork was just supposed to catch up with the family decision. I went home that night without signing anything. Mark texted me several times. He said I had embarrassed him. Then he said I had embarrassed our parents. Then he said I was overreacting. Then he said the loan would not hurt me because the business was doing well. Then he sent a longer message explaining that he had already invested his savings into the expansion. He said if I refused, employees could lose their jobs. That made me feel guilty. I knew he had employees. I knew people depended on their paychecks. For a few hours, I wondered if I was being selfish. Then I opened the documents again. The loan was $186,000. The guarantee was personal. My house was mentioned in the collateral discussions. There was nothing selfish about refusing to sign a legal document I had never agreed to. I went to sleep. The next morning, Mark called. He wanted me to meet him at the bank. I refused. He said the bank officer was expecting me. That sentence made my blood run cold. I had never spoken to that bank officer. I asked Mark how the officer could be expecting me. He did not answer directly. He said he had told them I was coming. I told him that was not acceptable. He became angry. He said I was making him look like a liar. I told him that was not my problem. That was probably the first time I had ever said something like that to him. Usually I would soften everything. This time I did not. After the call ended, I forwarded the messages to my attorney. He told me that my instinct to avoid the bank meeting was correct. He also told me to communicate with Mark in writing whenever possible. That was difficult. It felt unnatural to treat my own brother like a business contact. But the situation had stopped being ordinary family business. 2 days later, I received a formal notice from the lender. They said the application could not proceed without additional documentation. They did not accuse me of anything. They simply needed confirmation of my participation. I responded through my attorney. I stated that I had not agreed to guarantee the loan. I had not authorized anyone to represent me as a guarantor. I had not signed the documents. I did not consent to the use of my property as collateral. That was all. I did not call Mark a criminal. I did not threaten him. I did not tell my family what I suspected. I waited. The next week was uncomfortable. My father stopped calling. My mother sent me short messages asking whether I had changed my mind. Emily called me one night and said everyone was worried about the family falling apart. I told her I did not want the family to fall apart. I just wanted my name kept out of a loan. She said Mark believed I was sabotaging his future. I asked her whether she had seen the documents. She admitted she had not. I asked her whether she knew what the guarantee meant. She said she assumed it meant I was helping. That word again, helping. I realized how powerful that word had become in my family. Nobody wanted to say what was actually happening. They wanted to call it helping. I started sleeping badly. I would wake up around 3 in the morning and check my email. I knew that was irrational. There was nothing I could do at 3 in the morning. Still, I kept checking. Then something happened that I had not expected. My father called me. He sounded exhausted. He asked me to come over. I almost refused. Instead, I went. My parents were sitting at their kitchen table. My mother had a stack of papers in front of her. My father looked like he had not slept. He told me that Mark had been asking them for money for months. They had already given him more than they could comfortably afford. They had taken money from a retirement account. They had delayed repairs on their house. They had even put some expenses on a credit card. I was stunned. I asked why nobody had told me. My father said they were embarrassed. My mother started crying. She said they believed Mark would turn things around. She said his business had struggled after a major client stopped paying invoices. That explained some of his behavior. It did not excuse what he had done. My father admitted that Mark had told them the expansion loan would solve everything. He had apparently convinced them that once he opened the second location, cash flow would improve. I asked whether they knew he wanted me to guarantee the loan. They said yes. They believed I had already agreed. That was the moment I understood the anniversary dinner differently. My parents had not been trying to ambush me for fun. They genuinely believed I was helping. Mark had told them I was willing. They had built their expectations around something I had never agreed to. My father apologized. I told him I was not angry at him. I was angry at the situation. He asked what I planned to do. I said I was going to protect myself. He nodded. Then he admitted something else. Mark had previously asked him to sign a document using my name as a reference. My father had refused. That detail mattered because it showed Mark had been trying different ways to get the lender comfortable with the application. I asked my father whether he still had the document. He did. He brought it out. It was a photocopy. My name appeared in a section describing a potential guarantor. My father had written a note on the page saying he could not confirm my participation. I photographed it. I sent it to my attorney. Then I sat at my parents' kitchen table and felt something I had not expected. I felt sorry for Mark, not because I thought he was right, because I suddenly understood that he was in trouble, real trouble. He had borrowed money from our parents. He had invested his savings. He had apparently made commitments based on financing that had not been finalized. He had employees. He had a lease. He had equipment. He had bills. He had built his life around a plan that required a loan, and when the plan started falling apart, he had tried to make me carry the risk. I could understand why he was desperate. I still could not agree to become responsible for his desperation. My attorney eventually contacted the lender. The lender asked for clarification. After reviewing the documents, they told us they would not proceed with the application involving me unless I personally completed their verification process. I never did. That should have been the end of it. It was not. Mark was furious. He accused me of going behind his back. I reminded him that he had already gone behind mine. He said I was twisting everything. He said the documents were only preliminary. I asked why my income and property information were included. He said his loan broker had requested it. I asked why the broker had represented me as willing to guarantee the loan. He said he had assumed I would agree. That was the first time he admitted it, not intentionally. He said it while angry, but he admitted it. I saved the message. My attorney told me that was useful, not because it proved everything, because it established Mark knew I had not actually signed the documents. That distinction became important later. A few weeks passed. Mark's business began having problems. The expansion was delayed. The landlord for the new location wanted the security deposit. The equipment company wanted payment. His existing employees started asking questions. I learned most of this from my parents. I did not want updates. They kept coming anyway. At one point, Mark asked my father to convince me to sign a different version of the loan. My father refused. That caused a major fight between them. My mother blamed herself. She said she should never have encouraged Mark to expand. I told her she was not responsible for his decisions. She said she felt responsible because she had always protected him. That was the first time she admitted something I had known for years. She had always protected him. When Mark broke things as a kid, I got blamed for provoking him. When he skipped school, my parents asked whether I had noticed. When he borrowed my car and returned it nearly empty, I was told to stop keeping score. When I moved out, my parents said I was lucky because I could handle life on my own. Mark was always the one they worried about. I had thought that was normal. Now I understood it had created a pattern. Mark learned that someone would eventually solve his problems. I learned that my job was to be the responsible one. Those roles had followed us into adulthood. I had never consciously agreed to them. I just played my part until the loan. The actual turning point came about 2 months after the anniversary dinner. I received a letter from the county records office. There had been an attempted filing involving a document connected to my property. This time, the document had been rejected. The reason was a signature issue. My attorney requested a copy. When I saw it, I felt sick. It was a proposed security agreement. My name appeared on it. The signature was not mine. It was close enough to look convincing at a glance, but it was not my signature. My attorney told me not to touch the original. He arranged for the document to be preserved as part of the records. We also contacted the appropriate authorities because someone had submitted a document representing me. Without my authorization, I was nervous about that. I did not want my brother arrested. I did not want my parents to see him in handcuffs. I did not want my family to become a police story. But I also could not pretend it had not happened. The investigator asked me questions. I answered them. I gave copies of the documents. I provided my legitimate signature from older paperwork so they could compare it. I gave them emails. I gave them texts. I gave them the lender correspondence. I did not exaggerate. I did not speculate. When I did not know something, I said I did not know. When I remembered something incorrectly, I corrected myself. That was probably the hardest part. I wanted to explain everything. Instead, I had to stick to what I could prove. Eventually, the investigator contacted Mark. I was not present. I only learned about it because Mark called me afterward. He sounded different. For the first time since the anniversary dinner, he sounded scared. He asked why I had involved the police. I told him I had not called them to punish him. I had reported a document that used my identity without permission. He said he had not signed it. I told him I had never accused him personally of signing it. He became quiet. Then he asked whether I would drop the complaint. I told him I could not. He said the document had been prepared by someone working with his loan broker. I asked whether he had reviewed it. He said yes. I asked whether he had noticed my name. He said he assumed I would sign later. That was another admission. He had known my name was on the document. He had known I had not signed it. He had proceeded anyway. I did not say anything for several seconds. Then I told him I was done discussing it over the phone. After that call, our relationship changed. Not dramatically at first. There was no huge family explosion. It was quieter. Mark stopped coming to my house. I stopped going to his. Family dinners became smaller. My parents tried to keep everyone separated. Emily stayed mostly neutral. She told me she loved both of us. I told her she did not have to choose. That was true. I did not want people taking sides. I just wanted the facts to remain the facts. The legal process moved slowly. That was probably good. It gave everyone time to stop reacting emotionally. The lender withdrew from the application. The attempted property filing was formally rejected. My attorney helped me put additional protections in place. I changed the way I handled personal documents. I stopped sending copies of financial statements casually. I stopped assuming family members had good intentions simply because they were family. That last lesson was the hardest. My parents were devastated. They felt guilty. They asked whether they had failed me. I told them they had made mistakes. I had too. But I also told them I was not going to spend the rest of my life punishing them for those mistakes. My father eventually apologized for putting pressure on me at the anniversary dinner. My mother did too. She said she had believed Mark when he told her I had agreed. I told her I understood. I also told her that understanding was not the same as pretending it had been okay. She nodded. That conversation was uncomfortable, but it was honest. For a while, I thought Mark might eventually apologize. He did not. Instead, he said I had ruined his expansion. Technically, that was not true. His expansion failed because the financing depended on a guarantor he did not actually have. But I understood why he felt that way. In his mind, I had been the missing piece. He had built the plan assuming I would eventually say yes. When I did not, the plan collapsed. That was not something I had done to him. It was something he had built without my consent. His business eventually downsized. He closed the new location before fully opening it. Some employees found other work. He sold equipment. He renegotiated some debts. My parents lost most of the money they had given him. That hurt them badly. I offered to help them with practical things. I did not offer to pay Mark's debts. There is a difference. I helped my parents review their budget. I helped them cancel unnecessary subscriptions. I helped my dad organize their insurance documents. I helped my mother move some accounts into safer arrangements. I did not take control of their finances. I did not want another family member depending on me for every decision. It took months for things to settle. The police investigation did not turn into the dramatic courtroom event I had imagined when everything first started. There was no movie-style confession. There was paperwork. There were interviews. There were records. There were questions about who prepared documents and who submitted them. There were delays. There were conversations between attorneys. Eventually, I was told that the matter involving the unauthorized document was being handled separately from the failed loan application. I was not given every detail. I did not need every detail. The important part was that my name was removed from the financing process. The property record was clean. The loan was never put in my name. I did not lose my house. I did not lose my savings. I did not end up responsible for $186,000 of debt. And most importantly, I did not have to prove my innocence after signing something I never should have signed. Looking back, I still think about the anniversary dinner. The strange thing is that I remember tiny details more clearly than the big argument. I remember the restaurant music. I remember my dad complaining that his steak was overcooked. I remember my mother taking pictures of the cake. I remember the folder beside my plate. I remember how ordinary everything looked. That is what bothered me. The biggest financial crisis of my life began with a family dinner that was supposed to celebrate 35 years of marriage. There was no warning music. Nobody announced that something terrible was about to happen. There was just a folder, a signature line, and a brother who assumed I would eventually give in. I also think about the sentence I said when I told him to check his inbox. At the time, I was not trying to scare him. I had already sent the lender's correspondence to my attorney. Mark knew the email existed. What he did not know was that I had already preserved the documents and formally stated that I had never agreed to the loan. He had assumed I was bluffing. I was not. That was the difference. I did not have some secret weapon. I did not have a billionaire lawyer. I did not have hidden cameras everywhere. I had emails. I had copies. I had property records. I had bank statements. I had a lawyer who kept telling me to slow down and document things. And I had finally learned not to let embarrassment stop me from asking questions. A year later, my parents celebrated their 36th anniversary. They did not have a big dinner. They invited only immediate family. Mark came. I almost did not. I had no idea what it would feel like to sit across from him after everything. When I arrived, he was already there. He looked older, not dramatically, just tired. His business was still operating, but it was much smaller. He had gone back to doing the kind of work he had been doing before the expansion. We barely spoke at first. Then after dinner, he asked if we could talk. We went outside. I expected another argument. Instead, he apologized. It was not perfect. He did not take responsibility for every part of what happened. He said he had been desperate. He said he believed the loan would save the business. He said he genuinely thought I would help once I understood how much pressure he was under. I told him I believed that he had been scared. Then I told him I still could not excuse what he had done. He nodded. He said he understood. That was enough for me. We did not suddenly become best friends again. Trust does not work that way, but we stopped fighting. Over the next few months, we started having occasional conversations, sometimes about our parents, sometimes about work, sometimes about nothing important. He never asked me for money again. I never offered. That boundary actually made our relationship healthier. My parents also changed. They stopped assuming I would solve things. When my mother needed help with a financial form, she asked. When my father needed someone to look over a document, he asked. I helped when I could. Sometimes I said no. They learned to accept that. I learned that saying no did not automatically make me a bad son. That might have been the biggest thing I took from all of this. For most of my life, I thought being responsible meant absorbing problems. If someone needed help, I helped. If someone was angry, I tried to calm them down. If someone made a mistake, I tried to fix it. I thought that was maturity. Now I think there is a difference between helping someone and taking responsibility for choices they made themselves. My brother needed help. He needed financial advice. He needed to restructure his business. He needed to talk to his lenders. He needed to accept that his expansion was not working. What he did not need was my signature. And what I did not need was to become responsible for his debt just because we shared parents. I still have the original folder. I keep it in a locked file cabinet, not because I enjoy looking at it. I almost never do. I keep it because it reminds me how close I came to signing something I did not understand. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had signed that night. Maybe the business would have succeeded. Maybe Mark would have paid everything on time. Maybe I would have spent the next 5 years worrying about every payment. Maybe the business would have failed anyway. Maybe I would have lost my house. I will never know. What I do know is that I was being asked to accept all of that risk without having any control over the business. That was never a reasonable arrangement. The part that still makes me angry is how easily everyone assumed I would agree. Not because they thought I was stupid, because they thought I was predictable. They knew I hated disappointing people. They knew I cared about my parents. They knew I would feel guilty if employees were affected. They knew I had always been the responsible one. They counted on those things. I used to think that was what family meant. Now I think family should mean that nobody expects you to destroy your own financial security to prove that you care. The anniversary dinner itself eventually became something my parents joked about. My dad called it the night that started with cake and almost ended with a bankruptcy plan. My mother did not like that joke. She said it was not funny. I actually laughed the first time he said it, not because the situation had been funny, because it was finally over. There was no folder beside my plate, no signature waiting for me, no emergency loan, no threat hanging over my house, just my parents eating dinner. That felt normal again. A few months after that, I received another email from my mortgage company. It was completely routine. It was about my annual escrow review. I almost deleted it. Then I stopped, I opened it. I checked the account, everything was normal. For some reason, I sat there looking at the screen for a long time. A year earlier, I would have opened the email, skimmed it, and moved on. Now I read every financial notice carefully. I keep copies, I review my credit. I check property records occasionally. I do not obsess over them, I just pay attention. I also stopped feeling embarrassed about asking professionals questions. That was another mistake I had made. I used to think that if I admitted I did not understand something, people would think I was incapable. Now I realize that asking questions is usually cheaper than pretending you understand, especially when someone wants your signature. The final lesson was probably the simplest one. If someone puts a document in front of you and tells you that signing it is the least you can do for family, do not sign it because you feel guilty. Read it, take it home, ask questions, have someone independent review it, and if the person gets angry because you want to understand what you are agreeing to, pay even more attention. I do not think Mark woke up one morning and decided to ruin my life. I think he got scared. Then he made one bad decision, then another, then another. Each decision probably felt easier because the previous one had already crossed a line. By the time the folder appeared beside my dinner plate, he had convinced himself that I was going to say yes. My parents had convinced themselves too, and I had spent years teaching everyone that I probably would. The only reason the situation ended differently was that, for once, I stopped trying to keep everyone comfortable. I chose to keep myself protected instead. I did not scream. I did not threaten Mark. I did not expose him publicly. I did not seek revenge. I just refused to sign. Then I documented what had already happened. The facts did the rest. That is probably why the whole thing still feels strange to me. There was no grand victory. Nobody stood up and admitted I had been right. There was no dramatic courtroom moment where everyone applauded. There were just a lot of uncomfortable conversations, paperwork, lawyers, financial consequences, and months of rebuilding trust. But my house is still mine. My credit is intact. My parents are financially stable again. My brother eventually rebuilt his business on a smaller scale, and I learned that I can love my family without becoming their financial safety net. That is a lesson I wish I had learned much earlier. I also learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can say in a family argument is nothing at all. You can put the papers down, you can walk away, you can let everyone be angry, and you can wait for the documents to speak for themselves. Because when the truth is on paper, you do not have to yell to make people believe you. You just have to make sure you never sign your name to something you never agreed to.